Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how I designed and built my shop-built thickness sander. I'll start off by explaining how I came to go with this design, and then I'll explain and show how I built it and how it works, and then I will demonstrate. If you don't want to listen to me talk, I'll put in the description the time that each different section starts, so you can jump right to one of those if you don't want to listen to me talk. So last summer I purchased a kit guitar, and it was one of those where everything was already cut out and all I had to do was sand the body, paint it, do some work on the neck and put it together, and I really enjoyed it. And as a 30-year veteran shop teacher, I thought to myself, I can do this, I can build one of these myself. So I decided that's what I want to do. I started watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos on scratch build guitars. I've watched probably at least 100 different videos, and it quickly dawned on me that the most difficult part and that requires the most accuracy is the neck. And the most difficult part of building the neck to me is putting the radius on the fretboard. So I discovered that there were 3 or 4 different methods for putting the radius on the fretboard. One of the common methods was making some type of a sled for your router, where your router kind of rocks on a radius or back and forth or whatever. Those seem to work really well for those guys, but since I'm, at least for now, only planning on building 1 or 2 guitars, I didn't really want to try to build something that complex that had that one single specific purpose. It was really only good for radius and fretboard. So I decided I didn't want to build that kind of a thing. Then I saw a bunch of guys using a radius sanding block. Some of them made their own sanding block, some of them bought from Stu Mac. That didn't appear to me to be the way I wanted to go either. And then I stumbled upon this guy, and I'll put a link up in the corner here to his video. If you don't want to watch it, I'll paraphrase. He's got a motor on the edge of a table with an arbor about this long, and he's got a drum that looks like it was homemade on a wood lathe that's about 5 inches diameter, and it's got the concave radius carved into it, and he's got little strips of sandpaper glued on it, and as it spins around he passes the board underneath, and it works really well. As I watched it, I thought to myself, man, that arbor being that long, I can't believe there's not some flex to it, especially considering the pressure that you're putting on it. And I thought, I can do one better. I can make a drum like that and chuck it up in my lathe, and it will be supported on both ends, and there will be no flex. And so I made this. Okay, I put it on my lathe, and I carved the 12-inch radius, glued some sandpaper strips on there, and it seemed to work pretty well, temporarily. Come to find out that paperback sandpaper isn't very durable. So I've been experimenting for the past several months on what kind of paper and what kind of glue. I think I'm settled on using weldwood contact cement, and I need to find some cloth back paper. I did try, the most recent experiment was semi-successful. It was cloth back paper that I got at the auto parts store. It didn't say what number grit it was, but I'm guessing it was about a 100. And it wasn't quite rough enough. But that was the best result I had so far. I'm going to try some 60 grit, a piece of 60 grit disc sander paper that I'm going to cut in strips and glue on here. That's my next experiment. But anyway, that wasn't really working. And then I stumbled upon this thread in an old forum. This guy built a drum thickness sander to operate on his Shopsmith. This was a very impressive build. And what he did, if you're not going to watch the video, in a nutshell, was he designed the drum sander to operate on this side of the headstock, the head unit, using the auxiliary arbor. And as I watched that, I thought it was very, very impressive. Check out the thread. It's a pretty impressive project. But I noticed that because he was using this side of the headstock, he had to build a support and use a bearing and have a bearing for the axle to spin, and the same thing on the other side over here. So he had to make sure that, built these supports, put some bearings on there, and had to make sure, of course, that everything lined up exactly. I looked at that and immediately realized, well, wait a second, the Shopsmith has a lathe on it, and the spur center on the headstock and the live center on the tailstock are perfectly lined up. They already have bearings. I don't need to monkey with all that business. I already have that here. So I built my drum sander to fit on this side of the Shopsmith head unit. So first, to make the drum, I took a bunch of scrap pieces of poplar that I had, glued up a blank, and roughed it out on my wood lathe. I did mark T for tailstock and H for headstock. I did put a mark on the end of the drum that corresponds with the set screw, so that the drum would go into this spur center exactly the same position every time. Then I took my roughed out drum onto, I have access to a pretty good sized metal lathe. I took this spur out of my Shopsmith and I chucked this spur into my metal lathe, and thankfully this taper on this live center also fit my metal lathe tailstock as well. So just to make sure everything was going to be in the metal lathe exactly as it would be in here, I chucked it up in the metal lathe, and I used that to true my drum. I'm sorry I don't have any video footage of that, but here's some couple still shots of that happening. Once I got the drum trued, I took a 6x48 belt, sanding belt, and then wrapped it around here, and that fit really well. In fact, the drum, there was very little leftover sanding belt, so this size drum is just about perfect for a 6x48 sanding belt. In case you want to know, this drum is 25 3/4 inch long and about 2 3/4 diameter. And the way I attached the belt to the drum, I've seen guys use little wedge pieces, but my belt, the backing on my sanding belt was really thick and stiff and tough, so I just took one of those little screws with a self-drilling tip on it and just screwed right through there and attach it on both ends. Again, you can see a T there to remind me that's the tailstock end. Now, when I take this sanding belt off and replace it, I'm going to put a threaded insert in here instead, because I'm pretty sure that taking this screw in and out over time is going to strip the threads in the wood. So I'm going to put a threaded insert with like a 1032 screw in there so that I can quickly and easily change grits. The next step was building the frame, and so you can see I used a hole saw and a bandsaw to cut some rounded slots, I guess, that fit the rails on the Shopsmith, and I discovered that gravity alone was not enough to hold this thing down tight, so I made a piece of band iron here. You can see there's a couple Craig screws in there with a washer head, and this simply slides in there. Oh, I also marked this, the right side, and this side goes up, and it just goes in and out and holds that tight, and same on the other side, you can see it there. Okay, for the thickness adjustment mechanism, I have a block here, a sliding block with some wedge shaped pieces. I don't know if you can see back in there. There you go. And this piece of 3/8 all thread goes through all three of these pieces. And I use the horizontal boring feature on my Shopsmith to make sure that that hole would line up exactly on all three pieces. And then I used Matthias Wandel's brilliant method of making your own tap to cut threads in a piece of wood. Worked out really well. I probably could have used a T-nut here instead of threading the wood. There is quite a bit of play in this, but I figure a T-nut would probably have about the same amount of play. I'll link to Matthias Wandel's video on that as well. Now you can see each side has a wedge-shaped piece matching piece on each side of this bar. And on top of the wedge-shaped piece, you see a little Craig screw, and that's how I was able to make some micro adjustments to make sure that my feed table is parallel to the drum. This whole mechanism is probably the weak spot on this whole build. There's a little bit of play in this. And originally I was chucking this all thread up in my drill and to zoom this in and out real quick as I was building it, and that quickly became a burden. So I ground a 1/4 inch hex in the end of the all thread, and that way I can just stick that right into one of my drills and quickly take this carriage in and out. I'll link to my video how I did that as well. So you can see how this works. For quick adjustments. Then I took this old hex extension bit, heated it up and bent it, and that way I can make fine adjustments as I'm working. Now the downside to this was apparently the heat caused a little magnet inside to fall out, and it actually demagnetized it as well. So this thing, as the machine is running, the vibration, this thing falls off. It's a little too loose. So I'm going to try to find another little magnet just to hold that on. But this works pretty well. Usually about a half a turn is good. Now, as I said, the thickness adjustment mechanism is probably the weakness on this build. This isn't resting on the screw, but I did notice that when I turn this thin in the direction to go thinner, it seems to level that out. It seems to, the sliding bar in here seems to straighten out on its own. And again, I was able to use those little screws there to micro adjust to make sure that the table is parallel to the drum. I put a coat of paste wax on this surface here to make that slide easier. You can see I have a piano hinge on the back here. 2 jam nuts. Okay, the dust collector, turns out that it works really well. It's just a couple of pieces of old scrap 1/4 inch MDF. And I have, since my dust collection system is made with 2-inch PVC, I have 3 different couplers, and I can, these are capped, so whichever area of the belt I'm working on, I can have my vacuum directly above it. Works really well. I did see some similar designs that just had 1 port in the middle for the vacuum. They seem to work okay, but this works as well too. And the hose on my vacuum has a little piece of 2-inch PVC in the end, and I can just plug that right into here. And whichever area of the belt I'm using, I can put the vacuum in that area. Here's a view of the back side of the dust collector. And of course this just tips on and off so that I can remove the device, change the sandpaper, whatever I need to do. Okay, let's see it in action. I've drawn some pencil lines on here, and I'll hook up my dust collector. Turn on the dust collector, remote control. I think the paper I have on there, I believe it's 40 or 60 grit. I think it's a little too rough. It leaves a lot of scratches. I don't know if you can see those in the video. It leaves a lot of scratches in there. So I'm going to bump my grit down a little bit to a little bit finer. Try some 80 or maybe 100, and we'll see. So here's a practice guitar neck. I was just practicing using my drum sander here to make the thinner part where the headstock's going to go. And I discovered that the radius of the drum is perfect for the volute. I believe that's the way it's pronounced, the volute. And so I made this little miter gauge that slides on here and allows me to keep my neck perfectly square to the drum. Let me show you how that works. Now, unfortunately, I have to flip the dust collector up out of the way because this piece, it gets in the way. And that's something I did not foresee when I built this. I may try to trim some off of here down the road. We'll see. That, ladies and gentlemen, is perfectly square. Perfectly square. So, that's my drum sander. Pretty pleased with the way it works. I do have this extra drum. As soon as I get a chance, I'm going to take this to the metal lathe and true it up and carve a couple different radii in it. If anybody has any ideas what kind of glue, what kind of sandpaper you think would work better on here, I'm still trying to figure that out. Feel free to comment below. Be nice. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.